Today I created this short little video to introduce you to these modules that we've put together and talk about some of the main considerations for you as you approach teaching online, maybe for the first time. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that move to online teaching is a big change. Some people have said that they're really excited about it, that they've been looking forward to it and are really excited to teach online. And for others, they're finding it a bit overwhelming. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, I'm really hopeful that this series of videos and things to watch will help you feel more confident and feel more comfortable that you can do this. We can all transfer our material, present our material in a way that is online this summer and be really successful with that. Our ultimate goal is to provide a really high quality learning experience for students. Many of our students, as much as we didn't anticipate teaching online, they also didn't imagine themselves ever being online learners. And so the more we can do to support them in that, the better. So there is, of course, a lot that we could go over as we think about teaching online, but I wanted to start with four main considerations that I hope that you'll keep in mind as you approach the rest of these modules and as you approach building your class. So I'm going to go through the first three a little bit more briefly, and then we're going to spend more time on this fourth element, which is student time expectations. So the first main consideration has to do with format. So this is about thinking about how you'll be teaching the material. So what format, or more likely formats, plural, you'll be using. So in our school, we're really strongly encouraging the use of a blended format. So you're blending synchronous, and synchronous means that time that you're going to meet virtually, but together at the same time, with asynchronous content, or the things that students will do on their own time. And then, of course, when you think about format, you also need to think about where you'll use video, readings, where you'll either design or pull together web-based content, how you're going to think about assignments, how you'll use online discussions, and other sorts of things that you might incorporate. So there are a lot of materials through these modules that are going to provide details on some of these elements, and we're going to be providing some drop-in sessions, and our support team is also available to consult with you about what would work best for your specific content. So the first consideration is format. The second has to do with making sure that you're up to speed on best practices for online education. So all of these modules are going to be sharing best practices. We're using best practices as we put these modules together, so we're trying to demonstrate that for you. But I wanted to summarize three that I hope you'll always keep in kind of the forefront of your mind. The first has to do with lecture video content length. The days of recording a 3-hour lecture and just posting it online are really behind us. So we need to be thinking about video content differently. To be honest, the days of 3-hour lecture without any intervention in there are over in the classroom too when we think about it. Videos in online education really shouldn't be longer than about 10 minutes without breaking it up in some way. So you might think of an hour-long lecture in terms of subcomponents and create a series of shorter videos. Or you might record that hour-long lecture, but build in points for students to pause. So you might, after about 10 minutes, say something like, please now pause your video and think about how you've seen what I just talked about apply in your life or in your practice. Or you could ask them to pause their video and think about what might come next. So we just talked about the first element of whatever it is you're talking about. When you think about what might come next, what do you anticipate might come next? And just get them thinking before you go on and tell them the answer. So again, lots of ways to break up that content, but you should be thinking in about 10-minute blocks. The second best practice for online education has to do with cameras. So if it's possible for students to have their cameras on, we really want to be encouraging that. For people with lower internet speed, cameras on can sometimes cause problems and delays. So there might be times when, and there might be other reasons too why cameras really need to be off. But if students can keep cameras on, it really is going to be better for their learning. It helps build community. It also helps students stay focused on the content that you're providing. And finally, online teaching doesn't just mean taking what you do in the classroom and transferring it and now you do it all on Zoom. Really, it involves some transformation. So what we're encouraging you to do is step back from the course that you've provided in the past. Think about your learning objectives. Overall, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And then approach the development of your class differently. So what are the ways we can do that online that are going to best relay that material now that we're using this alternate format? And that really is what these modules are intended to help you do. In terms of technology, we're going to introduce you to a few tools that you can use as you build out your classes. We're really going to focus on Canvas and Zoom, and we are encouraging the use of Zoom over BlueJeans. In fact, I'd say we are strongly encouraging the use of Zoom over BlueJeans. It has a couple of features that make it better. One has to do with accessibility. There are a number of accessibility features or add-ons that are available on Zoom that are not available on BlueJeans. It also tends to be better for students who have lower speed internet. It tends to be a little less glitchy for them. And so those are just a couple of really good reasons to consider Zoom over BlueJeans. Student time expectations is where I want to spend the rest of this short little video. So if you look on the Canvas site, actually just below this video that you're watching now, you'll find a sheet that has more details from the University of Michigan's Academic Innovations. But I want to summarize just a few points. So there's actually federal law that determines how much time we should be expecting students to spend in order to receive a single credit over the course of a semester. Federal law says 45. So if we, and Academics and Innovations has helped us think about this, if we assume that about 50 minutes is generally accepted to be an hour, we've come up with 37 and a half. So 37 and a half hours is what we expect students to do to receive 1 credit over the course of a full term. So when you do the math, most of us will be teaching 3 credit classes or 1 credit class. So let's focus on 3 credit classes for a minute. If you're teaching a 3 credit class, you should expect your students to be doing 112 and a half hours worth of work over the course of the semester. So obviously some students work faster and some students work slower, but that should give you some general guidance on how much content and expectation to be producing. So your 112 and a half hours is going to include all of the work that we're expecting students to do. So things like any readings that you're expecting them to do. They might be having to engage with some external content that you've provided. Maybe you found something really good for them to read or really good for them to watch. Any of the synchronous sessions when you're all coming together, let's say on Zoom. Any videos that you've pre-recorded and posted for them to watch. Any responding that you expect them to do to discussion prompts. They might get together to do some studying for something or to work together on something that would be included. Any communication actually that they have either with their peers or with you about the content of the course would also need to be factored in. And then, of course, working on assignments. And with assignments, you need to be thinking about the weekly things you're asking them to do, but also the big picture assignments. So most courses have like 1 major assignment to 4 kind of larger assignments that they expect them to do over the course of the time. So you need to be factoring in time to do that as well. And of course, any time that they need to be taking a test or exams or quizzes that you've produced for them. So in these teaching modules that you're about to engage with here that we've produced, we've categorized all of these things that students might do to get to their 112 and a half hours into 4 categories. So there are things that you're going to be expecting students to read. They might be things that you've compiled for them. They might be things that you've actually produced for them, journal articles, books, etc. There are going to be things that students watch or listen to. And again, these might be produced by you, the videos that you record or the times they come together, or they might be things that you've pulled together for them, like a TED Talk. And they may be things that they watch or that they listen to. So it may be a podcast that you've pulled together for them. in terms of discussion, all of the various ways that they discuss together and with you, whether it's things that they type or things that they verbally are doing. And then create has to do with the activities, assignments, role plays, tests that you have them do and engage in. So there might be other components that, based on your specific content, don't fit into these 4 categories, but we had trouble thinking about any that don't fit into these 4 categories in some way. So let's think about what this credit breakdown actually might look like in terms of a class, your class, for example. So if we're teaching in the fall or winter, we have about 15 weeks over the course of a semester. So if you take that 112 and a half hours and you break it up over 15 weeks, we'd be expecting students to do about 7.5 hours per week of learning, right? Synchronously, asynchronously, and all of those ways we just talked about. Of course, the summer is a bit different. It's a condensed semester. So in the spring summer, we only have 10 weeks to get in our 112 and a half hours. So that means that students need to spend a little over 10 hours a week learning in order to get that 112 and a half hours in. This is why spring summer for both students and faculty can feel really very intense. So here's an example of what that 10.25 hours might break out to look like in a week. You know, there are countless variations of what this could, how this could break down, but I just wanted to give you an example. So spring summer classes are on the in the catalog on the calendar for 4 hours, but let's say you decide to do 2 hours as a synchronous session, and then you're going to provide some videos that you've pre-recorded and posted for them, about an hour and a half worth of engagement on those. So that would include any time you've done things like said, I'm going to pause, let's pause the video now and think about these things. So it would include all of that time, or the time it would take to go from one video to the next, about an hour and a half of involvement with those videos. Maybe you found a great TED Talk that you want them to listen and think about, so that you plan about 30 minutes for that, 2 hours worth of reading. And again, it's about engagement with the material. So the actual reading of the article, the thinking that you hope that they're also doing about the reading would count in that time. And then maybe you want them to do some online discussion. So maybe after the readings, you've posted to Canvas a few discussion prompts, like let's say 3, and you've said, please respond to at least one of these prompts with X many words. And you also would most likely expect them to read other people's prompts, and perhaps you say, respond to at least 3 of your coworkers or your colleagues' prompts. So you might expect about an hour for that. And then you want to make sure that you've built in time for them to work on their weekly assignments or any large assignments that you've given them over the course of the time. So I want to make one final thought about these breakdowns and what that might actually feel like to students. So there is some evidence that classes that work in a way that's hybrid, and I put this in this category because they're doing a little bit of their content synchronously and some of their content asynchronously, even though the synchronous piece isn't, you're not in a room together. There's some evidence that this can actually feel to students like it takes more time than a in-person 4-hour class for the summer would feel like. And when I kind of stepped back and thought about why that was, it made sense to me. So if I'm teaching a 3-hour class in the winter, let's say, and I have students with me for 3 hours, and maybe they're doing 4 to 5 hours worth of work outside of class, students are used to that. And then they move to a hybrid system where maybe they're only meeting together for 1 hour instead of 3 hours. And then the work they're doing outside of class is like 6 to 7 hours instead of 4 to 5 hours. Total, it's the same amount of time for them, but the change can feel to students like it's taking more time, right? It's taking away from their Netflix time a little more, right? They have to organize their life a little differently to get that done. And so sometimes just naming that for students can be really important, and helping students think about organizing their time to carve that out. So when I taught a hybrid class last year, I told students, even if we're not meeting, even if it's not an in-person meeting, you might just hold a block on that 3-hour time to get this asynchronous stuff done. And that will, sometimes they need those tips because, again, they're learning for the first time too. Okay, these are a few things that have already come up that people have asked, so I've just put them in here as frequently asked questions. You don't have to have exactly 10.25 hours of stuff for people to do every week. Some are likely going to be a little lighter, some are likely going to be slightly heavier. That's true in our residential classes as well, but we should be keeping that total 112 and a half hours in mind. I mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, it is true that some students are going to need more time to read than others. We're using that time as a guideline. You're doing your very best to estimate this on behalf of your students. And just like we would in our residential classes, we need to be thinking about making reasonable accommodations when that's needed. So again, this isn't really different than we would need to do for our students in the residential program. And then in terms of getting ideas for the different sorts of things you might do online, these videos are the place we want you to start. We're also going to be offering some optional drop-in times where you can come and consult with us about ideas and talk about your specific class and get some ideas from others. And you can set up a one-on-one session with our instructional team and they can talk you through your content. It is true that some of our classes are slightly different in what we want to do. You need some guidance on how to be able to accomplish that. In some cases, you can't do it exactly like you sort of had in your head. You could do it in the residential space, but we can come up with an alternative to meeting those learning objectives. So I hope that you'll find the rest of these modules helpful and that you'll reach out if anything comes up that you need.